very interesting and common question. Yeah, go ahead, Prakash. You are on mute, Prakash.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. So yeah, Nagendra, one of the questions that was posted in the chat was, how is toxicity evaluated for these kinds of gene therapies? When you plan this thing, how is the toxicity being evaluated, and what are the complications that are anticipated during these gene therapies?
So we do conduct preclinical studies in, monkeys, dogs, and rats and mice, depending on the appropriate species. And that gives us an idea about what kind of effects we might foresee. But just boilerplate template, these are viruses. So the two organs where they will be taken up a lot if administered systemically would be the liver and the spleen. These are the organs of reticular endothelial system or the mononuclear phagocytic system. So one can definitely expect some amount of hepatotoxicity that has been observed with Zolgensma. Other effects could be, to do with the spleen, the heart, and the kidneys. Hepatotox, renal tox, cardiotox can happen. We definitely do want to avoid genetic mutations or genotox as they call it, and we do assess that, by the way. But the most frequent adverse event has been hepatotox, both in the clinic and preclinically, that has been observed. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So Ravi, do you want to do it alternately, one from you, one from me, so that we can have a kind of a good discussion?
We can cover most of the questions, so we'll go like that. A good question I can see where, like, and I will combine another question. So we said concentration is not assessed in gene therapy. However, how we fix the frequency of the administration, and something similar, I will combine how the first in human dose, like we do for a small molecule, how it is selected.
So the concentration, instead of concentration, right? I mean, we are measuring the DNA of the administered virus. That itself is the concentration we are measuring. That's one layer of it. The second layer, of course, is measuring the mRNA. The DNA gets converted into the mRNA within the nucleus. We do end up measuring the mRNA too. And the mRNA then gets into the endoplasmic reticulum, where it gets converted into translated into the protein. So for hemophilia patients, we can actually end up measuring the factor VIII, which is responsible for hemophilia A. So we do end up measuring the protein concentration also. So yes, it is measured. It's just that, we don't look at it in a dense serial sampling fashion, just because, biodistribution studies, you have to basically sacrifice a lot of animals. So we don't collect a lot of dense time points, only 2 to 3 time points, 3 to 5 time points at the most. On the other hand, viral gene therapies are supposed to be one-time gene therapy. I mean, we are not talking about frequency of administration. Hopefully one dose should basically provide therapeutic benefits for the rest of the life for the patients. It might not always be the case. For Luxturna and Zolgensma, it does seem to work. For something like hemophilia A, hemophilia B, etc., it remains to be seen.
Yeah.
How long it can
work.
We might need to redose.
Dr. Anup, you would like to add anything? Otherwise, Prakash will take next question from the audience.
Yeah, so this is a great thing. Like, I fully agree with Nagendra. Right, from PPD, we participate in a lot of cell and gene therapy trials, where we look into the biodistribution and look into these aspects, like how much of the viral shedding is happening. We also look at other aspects of it, like, are there off-targets effect? We are correcting a gene with all these new technologies. Like, what are the off-targets effective are going to be? So all these things combined together provides this unique benefit to the patient, and this provides a unique opportunity to learn, like, how we are doing it in one subset of disease, how we can carry it on to a different subset of diseases too. There are different ways of doing the gene therapy. Nagendra talked about one, CRISPR-Cas technologies or oligonucleotide-based therapeutics are other areas too. So there are multiple ways we can run these trials and treat these patients, and these patients really need that, right? There are no drugs. So on paper, it will seem expensive, but again, one-time dosage cures the patient's life forever, changes their whole life. So I'm very excited about this field going forward, and working with actually Nagendra too in some of the aspects of it.
Great points. Great points, Anup. Thank you. Thank you for adding that.
I think the next question is mostly to Anu. Most of the gene mutations occur after the cancer onset. In such case, how do the gene profiling help before the cancer onset?
So it is true and not true in certain cases. Like if you look into the breast cancer, there are mutations in BRAF genes, which are germline mutations. So you're right, like some of these occur after, and it's not just the mutations which cause the cancer too. There is an epigenome too on top of that. And these tests which are coming, the next generations of tests, you need to profile both mutations as well as the methylations. So first you do the risk score, the type of cancers which I talked to, or I was mentioning earlier, GBM or pancreatic cancer. I told you, right? Everybody is equally susceptible. In that cases, we give the drug and we try to follow the patient and see how these aggressive cancers, if they're coming back, what state they are coming back, and can we give a second drug? So the sooner we can discover that, then we can provide them the better opportunities. I presented those case scenarios for you. So, so there are some point of care devices coming where you can detect at a very cheap amount, similar to the COVID test, about $35, $50. You can test, it's a plus or minus type of these things. It's present or not. I think that will be of real benefit to people, not only in places like India, but also in the community hospitals within the US systems also. So there's a whole push to push those things. But once you get it, then you can look into the more things. And then there are other tests coming too, which profile. So if you are at risk at cancer, let's say if I have got a cancer, I will like my kids to be profiled. I want to make sure that if anything about their genomic elements or proteomics I can learn about, which I can treat them early. Those are the cases, I think, which we talked earlier. But as the sequencing costs go down, today it costs a lot of money. If it goes down to $100, it should be done for, it's not just about cancer. Every single disease has a genetic element tied to it, right? If we can detect it early, we can cure it early. That's the whole point. I just gave you example of cancer in one sense, but it is a paradigm for every single cancer, every single disease type. It should be.
So a quick question, a basic one, where a TNBC, can it be identified like testing the blood samples, or we need biopsy?
You again, like you have to profile large population of patients with these diseases, then you can identify the fingerprints which are associated with each cancer type. There are certain mutations which happen in every single cancer patient. P53 is one of them. KRAS is one of them. BRAF is one of them. But then there are unique elements which can distinguish cancer types. Not only mutations, but gene expression patterns, but also the methylation profiles. So that's why these big projects are coming about. Like, I don't know if you guys have heard about a company called GRAIL, which profiled 10,000. 10,000 is a very small number. 100,000 cancer patients or 200,000 cancer patients, which is still a small number. You have to profile, again, normal population and the cancer population and see which fingerprints are associated with each of them. And then you can develop a test. That's the hope, right? So I'm just talking a little bit more futuristic side. One day it will come where you don't need to do a biopsy. You can do a mammogram. You can do like in certain cases, even the phones. You can. I don't know if you saw the study coming out of Google, where you can look into the eye and you can figure it out if you're having a glaucoma or not, right? So that is where the field is moving, right? Wearable devices. These fingerprints are present. They are reflected in our body. Our body responds to it much more later. If you're looking at protein, it happens much later. When we go to the doctor, we have symptoms. Then we go to the doctor. Rather than that, if we profile early, we go to the doctor, we monitor it routinely. If the cost goes down, if you have a test, then what we want to do in this case is, some of them are going not to be curable. We want to expand the time these guys, which can go beyond the life expectancy. If we can provide that, live them a happy, healthier life. That's what in this cases we have to aim for, right?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Anup. A follow-up question from my side, and then Prakash will take next question. So is this only HER2 protein expression which we consider that if it is less, then it will lead to this triple breast cancer or triple negative breast cancer, or there are some other proteins too?
That is the dominant one. That's what we look at, right? So that's one of the markers, but it is not in 100% of the cases, right? That's a key thing. So that's why all this, and it's an indication that you got it. So there are anti-HER2 drugs too, but are there other drugs which are going to work too? So it's not, it's like one drug fit kind of a scenario. That's what I was just trying to say. You have to look at whole basket of drugs. We have got millions of drugs. Is it going to profile better into certain cases? So once we have this database is set up where all the protein expression, all the mutation expression, which drug responds to which protein changes or which RNA changes, that will help us delineate this thing that, okay, if you have got HER2, that's the first step. What else you have got? So if, and how it is changing, you give one drug, your cancer mutates too. It is also responding to that drug also. That's why it's come back, right? It's an escape mechanism for it. So how is it escaping? What new stuff is coming? That's what is the paradigm in these cases.
Yeah. So I have a completely different question that's not from the list here. There are different types of therapies, right? Like when you talk of viral gene therapy or CAR T, how do you choose which way do you want to go when you're planning for these kinds of therapy to begin with? What is the logic of how do you choose how do you want to plan this thing?
CAR T-cell therapies are for cancer.
Yeah.
But the gene therapies, when it comes to gene therapies, CAR T-cell therapy is also a gene therapy. It's an ex vivo gene therapy. For rare diseases is where I'll focus on. We can look at viral gene therapies. The biggest advantage is they can deliver the genetic material to the nucleus where it should go. On the other hand, folks are looking into cell therapies, stem cell therapies, B cell therapies, T cell therapies, etc., which have been modified ex vivo to express the protein. So you're delivering it into the body and it expresses the protein. But each cell has a timeline, right? I mean, it has a lifespan. After that, it basically dies. It gets into the spleen and they're killed. So which one do we choose and how do we choose? We want to provide a therapeutic benefit which is long lasting. If the target tissue is something like the eye matures at 4 years of age. The brain, of course, once it matures, it's a one-way street. It won't replicate again and again. On the other hand, if the target tissue is the liver, you want a redosing paradigm. For the brain and the eye, once dosed, that's fine, it's done. Liver, it actively replicates 2/3 of the liver. Even if it is cut off, it can basically regenerate again. So if you deliver into the liver, it gets diluted because these cells keep dying and they keep reproducing again. They keep replicating again and again. So that's where you want to think of, a different way with lipid nanoparticles, with extracellular vesicles, or with these stem cell therapies, etc. That is where we want to go. Basically, I mean, that's kind of rare diseases that I can tell you. With oncology, CAR T cells are there. People are talking of oncolytic viruses, Imlygic, for example, etc. But it's literally about, where they can make the biggest impact. I mean, there are sometimes small molecules which work very well. There are sometimes ADCs which work very well. Sometimes biologics work very well. It's those cases where they are not working that we want to look at, other type of therapies. And I mean, Anup, please go ahead and.
So Prakash, you asked a very good question, right? How do you decide? And because that's what my first step, right? You got somebody gets a cancer, and first step they do is, okay, let me quickly go on Google what is available, right? Without knowing whether it's going to work or not going to work. That's where really it is important. The clinicians come into play. They look into these biomarkers, whether it's going to be effective or not. And I will give you examples like the paper published in Science and all other papers published. It comes in clinic too. I used to see it all the time when we were in the clinic, where I want to get immunotherapy. Like, okay, why do you want to get immunotherapy? You got a primary tumor, which you don't need it. It's no, I heard about it. It can cure the cancer. Okay. So now one of the biggest thing in the immune therapy is you need to profile it and figure it out. If you have a high, in this case, I will not call it high viral load. There's something called high mutational load. That means the number of mutations present, it has to be very high. Then only it's going to work. Doesn't matter you have got the same tumor versus this thing. You have to have a highly mutated tumor, then only it is going to work. So, so we do this battery of tests to figure it out, which is going to be the right effective therapeutics that's going to work for you, and then only do it. So you have to, again, it's a world where you have to educate the patient also, which is, I don't know how much possibility. I think patients around the globe are getting more knowledgeable, and everybody wants their dear ones to live as long as possible. So it's an interaction. You have to trust your patients. I've seen some point of time patients getting a little bit more upset that I'm not getting this treatment, but I heard another patient who comes to this support group is getting this thing. Okay, so you have to explain to them that, okay, this is why you are not getting therapy. This is not going to work for you. That's the reason. We can give it to you. It's not going to work. You're going to waste your time. You're going to waste precious resources of the hospital systems, as well as the pharmaceutical companies, as well as your dollars too. Even if you have dollars, it doesn't matter. It's not going to work. So we have to fight that battle as a clinician all the time. But again, I think patients are learning too. And by having an educational material where we provide to the patients, I think they go more about it, and having that available on the web, that is going to help them also. So some of the non-profit organizations are doing an amazing job, like where they educate the patients too, who is likely to get benefit for which of the therapies and all these things.
Yeah, I have one more small follow-up question. Can these therapies also used for chromosomal disorders?
So
when you say
some of the things which Nagendra was talking to about was chromosomal disorders, right? So you have, when you're born with certain mutations, you're trying to fix that mutations, and that's what it is, right? Obviously, if it is a large deletion, if the whole chromosome is deleted, and Down syndrome kind of a thing, then no, you cannot do those kinds of things. I think somebody asked, like, deletion, if they're deleted, it depends on the size of the deletion. It depends upon, if it is huge, it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of what we are doing. Chromosomal mutations is what we are trying to fix. But as Anup said, if it's too huge, it's hard to deliver, really.
Yeah, thanks Nagendra, and thanks Dr. Anup. Only one open question, so that we'll take. Already we are running beyond the scheduled time, so sorry for that. So how to address challenges like heterogeneous tumor cell population, which will possess variety of mutation, and how we define this optimal therapy? Probably this is the last question which I can see open, and then probably we can proceed towards closing out today's webinar.
Yeah, so
it's yours.
As I saw one of the slides I showed, where we profiled multiple single cells from there, and those kinds of heterogeneous tumor, there's still a lot needs to be learned, where we try to learn from them and try to identify learn more about the biology of the system, and try to identify the pathways which are unique in these heterogeneous tumors are, and then try to target or find something which is more effective in these cases. And obviously, means as we do those experiments, as we learn more about it, there will be always a subpopulation which will always be there, right? So maybe a combination therapies. Like then we have to, when we talk about combination therapy, we have to look at the cytotoxicity. What is the side effect is going to be doing? All those kinds of things will come into play. So the technologies have to become cheaper so that we can do this multi-parametric analysis. The technologies have to become faster so that we don't have to wait for 6 months. If we can deliver these things within a week, that's going to be amazing. And computational infrastructure, I think, is improving quite a bit, has substantially improved. You can increase your bandwidth substantially and take these data sets, and it is in much better shape, I will say, even from 5 years from now. Every time I go to these places, talk to places, to people, there are new algorithms coming in. So they are getting more and more standardized too, right? The more standardization will come in to say, the more it will be, we'll be able to learn better about these things. So I think if we don't devote our next few years on COVID, which we have to devote because it's a health crisis now, But I think once that pandemic dies a little bit or it comes under control, COVID is here to stay. I'm unfortunately to say that, right? We have to look at the long-term effects and make sure diseases like that don't come back, or we have an active plan to fight those kinds of diseases. So there will be a still substantial population. And good thing about the COVID pandemic is now people are investing or putting a lot more resources into R&D. Doesn't matter which country you are from, even the US dollar amounts from funding has gone up. People see the benefit of doing it. Be prepared, and they're trusting science more. I still think it's still true. When I was in India, if you're doing PhD, you are in the bottom one. You did not get engineering or medical. That's why you're doing PhD, right? But that things have changing. That things have changed, right? Substantially. People are getting more choices now. So having those brain power and getting things work on as a global community, I think the things will change in the next 5 to 10 years. We'll see huge improvements.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Anup, Nagendra, Prakash, very much. And I hand it over to Dr. Deepak for further proceedings. And thank you,
Dr. Anup and Dr. Nagendra, for a wonderful talk, and then followed by a very interesting panel discussion. And as we all know, with the current pandemic crisis situation, the field which we have discussed today, that's where future lies, be it viral gene therapies or genomic platforms for disease diagnosis. And I think I'm sure all the participants have gained a lot of insight into the fields. And in fact, this was live streamed also, so a lot of people would have joined there also, and they also have benefited from this. So with that, we come to the end of this webinar session, and my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Anup and Dr. Nagendra for your very interesting talks and very active participation and sparing time, especially to both of you. It's close to night time for you. I think Nagendra must be, it's 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the early morning. So thank you. We really appreciate both Anup as well as Nagendra. Thanks a lot. And just for the conclusion, would request very quickly, first from Prakash and then from Ravi, your concluding remarks in just a minute or two, and then we can officially close the webinar, and we can close down the live stream as well. So over to you, the moderator, first with Prakash, followed by Ravi.
Thanks a lot. I think it was a really a very, very entertaining talk, and especially on a Friday evening for you guys to come and sit here and talk to us and educate us. I think that's where it was. I think most of it, like what Deepak put up in the first slide about how we work with skills and improving skills for all these people. I think this is definitely one thing that was on top of the list. And I think really thank you very much, because a lot of people hear a lot of these things, but how to go into the details to understand these things was something that was very important to all the participants. And I learned a lot today as well. So thanks to Dr. Nagendra specifically for, it's like midnight. And I think Anup is getting close to midnight, I guess. So thank you both of you for that. Thanks a lot for your talk.
Pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity. Do appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's good meeting all of you virtually.
Yeah, I will
and you, Anup, again.
I will second back to Nagendra's, and it's always a pleasure. And anytime, any questions or any part of collaborations we want to pursue with anybody, I'm open to it. I look forward to those opportunities. Maybe COVID will go away and we'll be able to visit and do a live thing some point of time.
No, absolutely. I mean, I would intervene here, and I would definitely want both of you to be here in person for the next year, and hopefully by next year everything should be normalized, and we want you in person to give the same lecture and interact with the scientific community over here. So before Ravi, Ravi, please go ahead and
yeah, I will not take, I think we covered all, and I totally echo what Prakash said. A great learning session, and I'm very sure along with audience we all thoroughly enjoyed, and it's a great learning. We know that this area is like very relevant in current pandemic time, and obviously we as like Indian scientific fraternity quite strong in a small molecule area, but this is something we really need to understand from scientific perspective also. So thanks once again. Deepak, over to you.
Thank you. So very quickly for all the participants, let me just do a poll and then just a small feedback for today's webinar. So I'm just going to launch it. It will be on your screen, and you can just I'll hold it for a couple of minutes and you can just put your comments. Of course, a detailed poll on survey or the feedback thing will come back to you, but this is just because you just attended the talk, things would be pretty much fresh for you guys too. Please feel free to participate in the poll. Yeah. So for all the attendees, you would see on your screen a few questions about the webinar, and then please feel free to to submit your responses. So Anup and Nagendra, actually, this is just a very quick poll we do with the participants. Of course, both the talks were fantastic, but just it really adds up to our few points for us also for improvement. So this is just a general poll where they just share their views about if they have gained insights into the subject and was it useful to them and all. So just 3 to 4 questions for them to which they need to just respond.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to do, right? It helps all of us become better, right? It's always good to have these kinds of things where there's always room for improvement. Nobody's perfect in this world, right? So it just gives us everybody an opportunity how we can improve. Every person, like my kids, it's like a kids. You have to tell them, okay, so you need to improve those things. So if you don't tell them that there is nothing to improve, right?
No, I completely agree.
So true. So true.
I'm more interested in the no answers. Yes is always, there's nothing to do. I wish you could figure it out who is answering no and just pick their brain up. So that's the reason which will help you make better.
So Deepak, you are moving to next segment.
Yes. All right. So I think with that, we have come to the end of today's webinar. Once again, thank you to both the speakers and moderators. A special thanks to all the panelists and all the participants for attending this particular webinar. And we'll again be connecting next week. But before that, let me first stop the live stream. So we officially end our webinar here. Okay, so we are out of it. And now I think the last part of it, the